To our lecture, of course. As always, I have, of course, my little summary of what we did before. All right, so previously in history class. Okay, come on. All right, remember we talked about Western Europe last time. We'll finish up talking about Western Europe today and then jump into a couple other areas, specifically Asia. But remember the bubonic plague, the Black Death, whatever you want to call it, less than 20% of the population is left in Europe, okay? And so because of this, we see that not only have the governments been weakened, although there really wasn't much of a central government anyways, but somebody erased my feudalism. But the little manors, the dukes, the castles, the villages, all of that is weakened. And of course, the one central power throughout Western Europe, the church, is also weakened, okay? And of course, part of that is not only because like priests and all these other people died, but the people were angry at the church. And so, they kind of walked away from it, all right? And so in the aftermath of this, a couple things happened, okay? Number one, what's left over of the people and the royalty begin to unite, okay? They begin to restructure things. And they do this in two ways, okay? Number one, by war, all right? You go out, you conquer other areas, boom. You just made your country bigger. And now the fact that most of the people are dead because of the plague, it makes it a little easier to conquer. Number two, the other one is marriage, okay? You recall my running example, my son and Hunter's daughter get married, and so then the two kingdoms unite that way, okay? Now, one of the biggest wars during this time is the 100 Years' War. How long did it last? You better not get that question wrong, okay? We can't come up with creative names for wars, all right? And just one of the details that you need to know, it was France versus England, okay, because the English had a lot of land in France, and France wanted to unify itself, okay? They wanted to bring all of the French areas together, and this is the war where Joan of Arc, leads armies and defeats the English. Of course, because you can't have strong women, sorry ladies, the French allow Joan to be captured. She is tried as a witch and executed, all right? Second thing that happens during this time, because there are so few people, we begin to see that the peasants begin to get a lot of freedom because, one, the government has basically collapsed, but also, since there's not a lot of peasants, there's a high demand for workers, and so the peasants can actually demand better conditions and more liberties and more freedoms. And so, in order to keep peasants on their estate, the nobles, the dukes, the barons, the earlses, they basically grant these various freedoms to the peasants. Now, the one exception is England. In England, we see the complete and total collapse of feudalism. Not only do they gain certain freedoms, they gain all freedoms, okay? They are no longer stuck on these estates, okay? And we actually begin to see the formation of Parliament, which is a government body that will guarantee some of these freedoms for the common people, okay? Everywhere else in Europe, it takes another 200 or 300 years for stuff like that to happen. Finally, and Robert, I'm glad you're here, because otherwise I'd have to find another example. We begin to see the church and the government uniting, okay? Because both are weak, okay? The church needs help from the government. The government needs, in addition to conquering and marrying, they need all the help they can get in uniting areas. And so, Pope Santos says to King Robert, hey, I will start teaching the people that you are chosen by God, divine right, you're chosen by God, okay? And so if they rebel against you, or if they try to overthrow you, or if they try to disobey you, who are you really disobeying and overthrowing and rebelling against? God. And if you do that, you go to hell. All right? So, be good to King Robert is like being good to God, and you'll go to heaven, and you'll be like a good Christian. Oh, and in return, King Robert, I kind of need protection because all my priests are dead, and like I'm pretty weak. I mean, I am a priest. You know, we're not very strong. We don't have, you know, all that power that you do. And so they kind of help each other out. Okay, I also need tax breaks. All right? And so, you know, all of that stuff happens. All right? And so we move on to today. Alexa, show screen. All right. No, not quite. Okay. And so we'll finish off Europe talking about Southern Europe. Okay. Once again, as a reminder, all right, a group of Muslims known as the Moors conquer Spain in 711. All right. They cross the Straits of Gibraltar, and they enter Spain, and they actually sweep through the entire area. They make it into France before they're stopped at the Battle of Tours, okay, by a man named Charles Martel. I'm just babbling right now because I kind of like the history. All right, and so once they're defeated at the Battle of Tours, they are slowly pushed back and out. And by slowly, I mean slowly. It takes 700 years. Okay, yeah, that's pretty slow. All right, and so during those 700 years, okay, a couple of things happen. All right, you know, the societies live side by side, but yeah, ever so slowly, the Moors are being pushed out. The Portuguese are the first to liberate themselves. They are the first to push all Muslims out of their country. I'll show you where Portugal is in a minute. Okay, because the Spanish, though, are still fighting their wars against the Moors, the Portuguese are able to start doing other things. And I mean, Portugal isn't very big. Portugal isn't very strong. But when every other country is still basically like, you know, fighting each other and trying to unite and arguing over which pope is the best pope and all of this other stuff, there's really no obstacles to the Portuguese doing other things. And so one of the things that they do, because Portugal is right on the ocean, they begin to explore, okay? Remember, Europeans had been exposed en masse to Eastern products during the Crusades. And yeah, it's been about 200 years, but Europeans still want the spices and the yummy stuff and the sugar and the tapestries and the silks and all of this other stuff. And they want it for as cheaply as possible as they can get. Okay? And so, because the Portuguese live by the ocean, because there's nobody to threaten them or to stop them or for them to worry about because everybody else is too busy fighting each other, they begin to explore. They begin to head out into the Atlantic. Okay? They capture a few ports in Morocco, but where their exploration really begins to start, and we'll actually get into this in the next chapter, one of the princes, and he's not the prince that's going to become king, so he's like the Harry, all right, even though his name's Henry, he's like, you know, third or fourth down the line, okay? He's known as Prince Henry the Navigator in history because he basically revolutionized their navy, and he pushed for their navy to begin exploring. They realized that if they're able to find a way around Africa, they will be able to head into Asia and be able to, you know, bring all of this treasure. Now, it takes about 100 years, okay? Spoiler alert, but we'll get to that in the next chapter. But they do begin to sail, little by little, down the coast of Africa. Along the way, they do two things. Number one, they establish trading posts, okay? Because you can't carry everything that you need on a boat if you're going to go from Portugal to Asia, okay? And so they need to trade, okay? Here's where we get to the negative sides of history. Some of the things that they begin to trade at those outposts is European goods for slaves, okay? But once again, you know, we'll definitely talk about that in depth in the next chapters. The other thing that they do, they discover that they can actually grow sugar in Africa. They don't have to go all the way to India to get it. Okay? And so the Portuguese begin to establish sugar plantations in Africa. All right? So that brings them some money already. Okay? Now, once again, the map of Europe. Okay? Moors invade Spain. Okay? They make it, okay, into southern France, and then, of course, they are slowly pushed out. Here's Portugal, all right? So as you can see, it's right along the ocean. And so, yeah, they're able, if I had a bigger map, they're able to come around and begin to sail down the coast of Africa, okay? And so they become the first to explore, to head out into the unknown, okay? As I mentioned, when the Moors invaded, okay, yes, you have the Portuguese, but they're not united, so there's different kingdoms that are established throughout Spain. And just like any other kingdoms, just like any other countries, they compete with each other, they're allied with each other, they do separate things, okay? And even though there's a 700-year war going on, there's Jewish people, there's Muslim people, there's Christian people. They live in relative peace to one another. It doesn't matter if you're living in a Muslim kingdom or if you're living in Portugal or if you're living in a Christian kingdom. Most people are pretty much left alone to do what they want. Yes, there's a war going on, but it doesn't affect the everyday lives of people. People really don't know what's going on until the army sweeps through and says, oh, by the way, we're no longer Christian, now we're Muslim. Or we're no longer Muslim, now we're Christian. And people are like, okay, whatever. We'll still keep doing what we were doing before, all right? And that's basically how it goes for these 700 years of war, okay? As far as the Christian kingdoms go, though, just like we saw in the rest of Europe, okay, these kingdoms begin to merge. But of course, because this war is more religious-based, okay, the various Christian kingdoms, all right, begin to marry each other. And so once again, my son is going to marry Hunter's daughter, but I come to him and say, dude, okay, we're both fighting these Muslim and Jewish invaders, but if we combine our forces, and if we combine our countries together, we can completely wipe them out, all right? And so, we see this happen over the space of those 700 years. The biggest one, though, okay? And this happens in 1469. So this is towards the end of that 700-year period. And once again, let me just show you the map. There's two kingdoms, well, there's about 3 or 4 kingdoms, but there's 2 big kingdoms left. The kingdom of Castile, all right, and the kingdom of Aragon. Aragon is basically eastern Spain and southern Spain. They also control several islands in the Mediterranean, including Sicily, all right? If you ever wondered why some Italians and Spanish people look alike, you know, it's kind of why. The kingdom of Castile is what today would be most of modern Spain, okay? So, what happens there? Well, it's not so much like, you know, me and Hunter get together and marry our children. The king of Aragon is a man named Ferdinand. Good old Ferd, or Fred, okay? The queen of Castile is a woman named Isabella, all right? And not to say that they didn't love each other, okay? But Ferdinand goes to Isabella and basically says, hey, bro, all right? You are the queen of the largest kingdom in Spain. I am the king of the second largest kingdom in Spain. Come on, let's get married, all right? And, you know, our kingdoms together will be the most powerful one. And we'll be able to wipe everybody else out, okay? And basically she agreed. I mean, that's a marriage proposal, right? You know, right there. Isabella agrees, and so they get married. And basically now you have like this huge Spanish kingdom You have these smaller Spanish kingdoms that eventually get absorbed. And of course, the Muslim kingdoms that are left, those get conquered and taken over as well. Okay? Now, this happens a little further down the line. Ferdinand and Isabella do have children. And eventually their children begin to marry, those Habsburgs. Okay, yay, I know. They begin to marry into the Habsburg family. And so like Spanish princesses marry Habsburg princes, and then vice versa. Habsburg princesses marry Spanish princes. And so their families eventually begin to merge. Eventually, there are two branches. There's the Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs. The Habsburgs rule both Austria and Spain. Who knows? Maybe like half of you have Habsburg blood in you. You're like, well, maybe not you, or me. I don't know. I am Spanish, kind of. So yeah, okay. But before they become like genetic freaks because they married their cousins, they married into the Spanish family. All right. Now. As I said, okay, Ferdinand and Isabella get married. They get married in 1469, okay? And we'll talk more about some of this stuff in the next chapter, but they unite their armies. They defeat everybody else, okay? Christian, Muslim, Jewish, they don't care, all right? They defeat everyone, okay? By 1492... the only Muslim city left in all of Spain. So they do this, like, they're married for about 30 years by the time they completely eliminate every other bit of competition. Eventually, there is a kingdom, a city in southern Spain called Granada. It is the last Muslim stronghold. The armies of Isabel and Ferdinand completely wiped them out, okay? And so after March of 1492, Spain is completely Christian, all right? It is one kingdom, all right, under the control of Ferdinand and Isabel, and there's no other, groups left, okay? What else happened in 1492? Yeah, he happened in August, okay? So just a few months after they win this 700-year-long war, they send Columbus off to do his thing. But we'll talk about him in the next slide and in the next chapter, okay? Now, because they've defeated all of the armed resistance, Ferdinand and Isabella want every non-Catholic out of Spain. Like, we've defeated the armies. And remember, for the last 700 years, Muslims and Jewish and Christian people, they've all lived together, side by side, influencing each other and just being neighbors and whatever. Like I said, the only reason they knew there was a war is when the armies would come through, all right? But otherwise, they lived in relative peace. Just FYI, I am the Spanish teacher here on campus also. 30% of Spanish is actually Arabic, all right? They're Arabic words that have been adapted to Spanish. Yeah. There's an Arabic expression, inshallah, God willing. In Spanish, it's ojalá. All right, we just. You're like, oh my God! Yeah, it means God willing. Yeah, that's where it comes from. Yeah, it's not even it's not even Spanish. It's Arabic, or it's corrupted Arabic. All right, So there's a lot of stuff like that in Spanish. And so what begins to happen? Okay, we can't send armies against average people. And so what they do, and a lot of people have asked me, so Santos, what was the Spanish Inquisition all about? Eventually it has to do with what's called the Reformation, when Protestants begin to arrive. But it starts off as a way to root out any Muslims or Jewish people that are still living in Spain after the final defeat of Granada. Okay, and so the word converso literally means converts. There were a lot of Muslims and Jews that converted to Catholicism, obviously because they wanted to stay in Spain. The Inquisition was meant to root out, and I put there in quotes, fake converts, because there very well could have been Jewish people and Muslim people who converted just to stay in Spain and didn't really believe in Christianity. But then again, there might have been some that converted because they really did want to become Christian. Okay? Nobody knows. But the Inquisition was like, you know what? We're going to find them and we're going to get them out of Spain. And if we have to torture them to confess, well, then we're going to torture to confess. All right? And I know, right? One of the tests that they would do is they would invite a suspected, converso over, and they'd invite them to eat pork. And if the person refused, because in both Islam and Judaism, it's forbidden to eat pork, they'd be like, ha, converso! And then, of course, they'd take them, they'd arrest them. There's this city in southern Spain called Cordoba, where they have the Museum of Torture. I've been there, okay? It is not a nice place, okay? They basically have all of the devices that they used to torture people in the 13, 14, and 1500s, okay? Definitely the things that humanity has learned to do to each other is not good, all right? And so, people who confessed were either executed or they were banished. They were forced out of Spain, okay? And so, by 1499, all right, so it's been about 10 years since, no, I'm sorry, I can't do maths. It's only been about 5 or 6 years since the final defeat of Granada. Over 500,000 people, both Jewish and Muslim, are forcibly expelled from Spain, okay? So after 1499, there was literally nothing left of any other faith except for Catholicism, all right? Some people were executed, but most people were just banished, all right? They were forced to leave Spain and relocate to other places, all right? So now, we've defeated, all right? Spain says we've united, we've defeated all of the Muslim kingdoms. This 700-year war is over. We've forced all of the Jewish people and all of the Muslim people to leave Spain. What can we do now? All right? And so, and like I said, we'll talk about this in the next chapter when we talk about the age of exploration. But now Spain basically turns its attention to the rest of the world. And at some point, a Genovese sailor, because Columbus was from Genoa, comes to them with a proposition. The earth is round. If we go west, we'll eventually hit the east. The Portuguese are doing their thing with going around Africa, but I guarantee you my plan is better. And of course, not only was he promising all of these things, but, hey, you are going to get so rich off of these explorations and off of all of the Asian goods that we're going to bring back to Spain. And of course, there's gold there. Everybody knows there's gold in Asia. You're going to be able to finance new crusades, okay? Because remember, the last crusade ended in 1291. We're talking 200 years later. People still have crusade on the brain, okay? And so this actually convinces Ferdinand and Isabella, well, Isabella mostly because she controlled the money, to finance the trip. Like I said, I'll get into details of this, but we already know Columbus never makes it to Asia. He ends up in a new continent, which within 50 years, Spain has not only conquered it, but, all right, they have become extremely wealthy because there was gold, silver, treasure all up and down America. They actually don't go back to the Holy Land to retake it. They forget about crusades because they've just encountered millions of natives that they can just convert to Catholicism, all right? Much easier than having to go fight the Muslims again and try to bring that land back, okay? So, but yeah, all right? That's a story for another chapter, all right? The Renaissance, okay? So now, at the same time, all right, Europe begins a period known as the Renaissance, all right? The word Renaissance, you should know this, is a French word that means rebirth. Thank you, Amber. It means, that's why I wrote it right there in big words. It means rebirth, Okay, what do you mean rebirth, Santos? Well, a rebirth of knowledge, a rebirth of culture, a rebirth of all of the stuff that the ancient Romans and the Greeks had achieved over 1,000 years before. Okay, now it begins around 1430, and we consider it ended, quote unquote, around the 1550s. So for about 100 years, Europe is, quote unquote, rediscovering, okay, all of this ancient knowledge, all right? The Renaissance marks the end of the Middle Ages, all right? Because during the Middle Ages, after the fall of Rome in 476, remember that all of this knowledge, okay, that the Romans and the Greeks had achieved kind of gets hidden away by the Catholic Church, all right? And so it is during this time that this knowledge returns, okay? I'll explain how in a minute. And so people begin to look to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, all right? The Romans were like the greatest engineers in history. They developed roads that are way better than the ones here in Utica, okay? Seriously, for reals, all right? And so I ask you Italian Americans, you know, tap into your ancient Roman roots and fix our roads, please, all right? Hunter's like, no. No, that was 2,000 years ago, Santos. We're good at cooking now. It's like, lots of pasta. Like 2,000 years ago, the Romans were like the greatest engineers and all this other stuff. And yet, by the 1400s, I mean, you've got dirt paths. You've got, little trails through the forest. The Romans had running water through most of Italy. By the 1400s, once again, you've got people pooping in buckets and throwing it into the street. Okay, so how do we go so far backwards? All right, and so people, like I said, they begin to look to the past to bring us back to a level of technology that had existed. Okay, now, as a result of the plague, remember the church is weakened. Okay, so some of this knowledge, okay, is up for grabs. Okay. Other stuff, though, arrives because of the fall of Constantinople, all right? I'll get to that in a minute. But the Renaissance starts in Italy, okay? Italian scholars and Italian artists begin to imitate the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, all right? Obviously, because the church has lost its influence, they're sponsoring some of this. Okay, fine, let's give people knowledge and see what they can do with it. In addition, bless you, you have various nobles, you have various royal families, okay, that are also pushing some of this stuff. It starts off in the Italian city-states, specifically in Florence, okay? If you go to Florence, I've been there once. I mean, it is amazing, and most of the, these important works of art are there, okay? Like I said, it's an experience of a lifetime to be able to see so much beauty, so much architecture, so much art in one place. Over the next 100 years, it begins to spread into other parts of Europe, France, the Netherlands, England, okay? It eventually, encompasses most of Europe. Like I said, okay, it started off as this search for knowledge. The big help, though, okay, not just the church loosening the availability of the knowledge, but when Constantinople falls to the Ottomans, okay, the Byzantines had all of this stuff that the Romans had as well. Because remember, they started off as part of the Roman Empire. Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Empire for a time, all right? So all of the stuff that they had, it wasn't as if the Ottomans just walked in and took over and burned everything. There was time for the people to escape. There was times for these refugees from Constantinople to arrive in Europe, and they're like, and oh, by the way, we got all these books with stuff, all right? Unfortunately, they're all written in Greek, Okay? And it isn't just stuff from the Byzantine Empire, but it's all of the stuff from ancient Greece. So like the ancient Greek philosopher, the ancient Greek mathematicians, the ancient Greek, scientists guys that discovered that the earth was round thousands of years ago, or how big the earth was, or the fact that the earth goes around the sun. Oh, and by the way, most of that stuff they got because the Greeks under Alexander had conquered the Persians, and they took the knowledge from the Persians. So, we've got it all right here, and guess what? It's not the property of the Catholic Church. So, hey, you need me to translate it into your language? By all means. Okay? And so suddenly all of this knowledge begins to sprout. Okay? And people don't know what to do with all of this. Most people think about the Renaissance, okay, as strictly artistic, but it also had to do with knowledge. Okay? Now, I think I said this already 2 or 3 times. No longer did the Catholic Church have a monopoly on knowledge. Because now people either took stuff from places that the church had abandoned, or all of this stuff that came out of Constantinople. Okay? And so we begin to see in the art world, number one, religious paintings, but with messages in them. Okay? If you look at art from the Middle Ages, they paint, Jesus, and he was just like there. Okay? Or they paint, the Virgin Mary, and she was just there. Okay? But now, we begin to see more detail. We begin to see a story. Okay? It isn't just like a profile. All right? We begin to see, they call it Madonna, but it's not like Madonna. But a Madonna is basically the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus. So we start to see, different paintings. All right? In addition, now that we have this Greek knowledge, and the church doesn't control everything, why don't we start painting other religious beliefs? And so we begin to see illustrations of Zeus and Neptune and Ares and Aphrodite, the various Greek deities that up until this time people were like, no, that's wrong, that's heresy, you're going to hell for painting them. If you want the Roman names, Jupiter and Mars and Venus, okay? All of those we begin to see, okay? Like I said, whereas most people think of the Renaissance as strictly art, it was also secular learning, okay? You need more than just religion, okay? You need to understand nature and the cosmos and how things work, okay? You need to understand, your ancestors 2,000 years ago understood how to build a road, okay? Praying is not going to make it happen, all right? So you need to study these old engineering stuff. And so we begin to see the beginnings of something called humanism, where basically you can't just sit there, pray, and, I'm going to get inspired. No, you need to study. You need to apply things. You need to try things, okay? It all comes from here. Sorry, I'm pointing at your brain, not your hair. It all comes from here, okay? Not because you prayed really hard one day. All right, it's because you're the one who did it. All right. Now, the other thing that people begin to realize, and this further weakens the hold of the church. Okay, all of this engineering, all of this architecture, all of these advances that we don't have anymore, the Greeks and the Romans did it without Christianity. Okay. Once Christianity happened, it's like all that knowledge disappeared. All right? And so they're like, so why do we need religion to build a road? Okay, we don't. We need math, all right? We need, that kind of knowledge, but you don't need to know all your prayers and 20 Hail Marys and 5, Our Fathers. And no, you need to study engineering and math and science and angles and geometry. That's what you need, okay? Oh, and by the way, because all of this is written in Greek and Latin, you need to study Greek and Latin, all right? So that you can understand these textbooks so that you can go out and build a road that won't flood, hint, hint, or that, won't develop potholes every 6 months, okay? Yeah, you know what I'm talking, yeah, damn, my road sucks. Anyways, so yeah, okay? And so then people begin to, like I said, this weakens the hold of the church, all right? Because people are now studying things like math and engineering and art and science and not religion, okay? Because you don't need it to make your life better, all right? Now, when it comes to the Renaissance, okay, people wanted this beauty. People wanted the art. People wanted these paintings. Once you see seriously, this room sucks, all right? If anyone brings in some color or some paint or some drawings, I could never go back to just the three blank. This one's blue, all right? So, white wall, you're like, this room does suck, huh? Yeah, all our rooms are like that, all right? They're they have technology and that's it, okay? And so, in this case, okay, someone would give them money, someone would sponsor them, they would paint, they would sculpt, they would do whatever the person wanted them to, and here you go, okay? Now, obviously they didn't get rich. No offense, artists tend to not get rich in their lifetime. Granted, all of these works are now worth like $1 bajillion. I have a friend who is currently at the Louvre in France, and she sent me a picture of the Mona Lisa, and I'm like, wow. Yeah, Da Vinci didn't make $1 bajillion off the Mona Lisa, but I'm sure you could probably get it for that much if you stole it. And,
you get it for free if you stole it.
Yeah. No, and then you sold it, okay? And just FYI, the Mona Lisa is like that big, okay? It's like really teeny.
Yeah. The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali, this big.
Yeah.
And then that's like the most mind-blowing thing to me.
Because you only see it in textbooks, and of course it's enhanced and all that other stuff, but it's literally only that big. Yeah, and you think you're going to look at this like, oh yeah, no, it's like that. It's like a really big postage stamp. All right. Anyways, the downside to this though is that people might hate it because of the content. People might hate it because how dare you paint Jesus with a six-pack and pecs and, that's not what he looked like, okay? Right now, I'm in several discussion groups who people are like, Jesus was born in Israel, supposedly 2,000 years ago in the Middle East. His greatest miracle was being a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white dude, okay?
I don't get that.
But that started during the Renaissance because people wanted Jesus to look like them, like Europeans, okay? So if I want to sell a painting, no offense, Jack, you're the only blonde-haired, blue-eyed white dude I have in my class right now. If Jack wants a painting of Jesus and he wants Jesus to look like him, guess what? I'm going to paint him with blonde hair and blue eyes. And so, the downside, you're going to be, obviously this is now like 1,500 years later, you're going to be criticized. You're going to be persecuted for doing all of this stuff, okay? One of the most famous artists during this time, Michelangelo, he had so many sponsors. He had so many people wanting him to do stuff. It's funny because we think of Leonardo da Vinci. He wasn't actually that great of an artist. He was more of a scientist. Art was just his hobby. I know, he was really good at it, all right? But that was his hobby. He was more of an intellectual. Michelangelo was a true artist. He painted, he sculpted, he did frescoes, he did all of these different mediums. And so he had bankers wanting him to do work. One of the most important families in Florence, the Medici family, they basically owned him, all right? Because they're like, yeah, we'll give you all the money you want. You just need to do all this art for us, okay? The Florentine Wool Guild, he painted stuff for them. They were pretty important as far as merchants went. And then finally, he caught the attention of Pope Julius II, and he said, you know what? Come and paint this little church that we have here over on the side of the Vatican. All right, he did the Sistine Chapel. Okay, and I've been to that too. You're not allowed to take pictures. But it's really dark and musty, so it's not all that comfortable. But yeah, one of his, he basically dabbled in everything. Okay? Now, when it came to religion, and once again, I bring this up, yeah, people painted Jesus and he was just, there. Painted the Virgin Mary and she was just there, okay? But these artists showed them as humans, okay? You have a woman who just gave birth. So what if it's birth to God, okay? She's going to be breastfeeding him. So, they would show Mary with one titty hanging out, and there's Jesus, drinking, and people are like, no, the Virgin Mary didn't have boobs. And she did. She was a woman. She fed the baby. There was no formula. She's not going to sit there with a bottle, okay? And so people, he sculpted David, okay? This was David who fought Goliath and stuff. And guess what? He is 100% buck naked, all right? He drew everything anatomically, I don't know if it's correct or not, but it was there, okay? The junk is there, the flesh is there, the pecs, the abs, the muscles, the, sculpted calves. And people don't think of, King David is running around naked, but he did, and he's just like, no, this is what he looked like under those robes. And people are like, no, it can't. No, he was holy. He had the power. No, so what? Okay? And so, okay, because these artists become so influential, all right, eventually we begin to see them painting things that nobody else would have thought of, and in ways that weren't considered. Because in this case, obviously, they were trying to humanize, all right, these things that up until then had been like, no, it's God. You can't humanize God. Why not? Okay, why can't God have? And I'm not saying it's right, but why can't God have blonde hair and blue eyes? Why can't he or she? Why can't God be a she? Why can't God have, the pecs and the abs and, the 34-inch python biceps, why not? Okay? I don't know. Apparently they made a movie about Jesus a couple years ago and girls were like, damn, that's one hot Jesus. I was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, okay, so why can't they be humanized? All right? Now, even though I put up this slide, I am going to stop.